Hello guys, welcome back to the Syncro workshop on a very cold day. This video that you're going to watch now is a project we did a couple of years back and have only just now got to actually releasing the video. We had a ton more footage and it was going to be a whole series, but we lost a bit of it, so we've compiled it into a smaller video. So this is our M57 Transit. It's a Mark 7 Transit, 5-speed manual. We use the existing 5-speed manual gearbox, stuck an M57N 220 horsepower engine in the front of it. Let's have a look. So this is this Transit that we picked up, bought it locally from a fabrication company, and as you can see it's in pretty much standard condition for a transit van this age that's been used for work stuff. And you can see it's super clean and super tidy and has been valeted frequently. In the back, same, it's a work van, you know, so everything's a little bit beat up, knocked about, some rusty arches there, rusty front wing, the rear end there, some extra rust around that arch. Pretty standard transit stuff, you know. The sill on this side as well is gone, and the odd dent and bits and bobs, a good dent there. So all of that we're going to get stuck into and get tidied up. A fair bit of welding, but there's nothing major, just a few bits of patching here and there, and then we'll stick a load of new panels in and stuff. So we picked this up cheap because it had an issue with either the clutch or the gearbox. The engine ran fine, surprisingly. Obviously, generally it's the engines that go on these, but the engine was okay. It just wouldn't go into gear or drive. That's why we picked it up, because we knew we were going to take the engine and everything out anyway, so it didn't really matter too much to us. To figure out exactly what that is, we're going to start pulling the front of the van apart and getting stuck into it. So just pulling the van apart on the front end, get all this bumper off, the flitch panel and everything. You can get to the engine a load better that way, and you can see here again loads of standard transit rust. Both front wings are pretty knackered, and a few other bits and bobs, some little patches in that front end, but it's not horrendous. It looks worse than it is. We're reasonably close to the coast here, so we do get a lot of salt in the air and stuff, so it does rot stuff out. With the front end pulled apart now, we can drag the fork truck in and look at getting the engine separated from the gearbox and out of the way. So just having pulled that out, you can just see the input shaft there where I'm stood. Shouldn't be there, and it's still in the clutch. There's a better angle. So you can see the whole input shaft from the gearbox is still stuck in the clutch and in the flywheel with the clutch fork, and obviously it shouldn't be. And then looking at the gearbox, you can see here now pulled itself out. So that was the failure with the van and why we'd got no drive. It literally had just unscrewed the bung on the front there and pulled the whole shaft out. And then another look at the engine bay while we're here, you can see some surface rust around, which has turned all the paint orange. But generally it's not too bad. There is the odd patch here and there. Inner wing on the passenger side is pretty dead, so that'll get replaced. Old gearbox here then, with the missing input shaft. There's just a few bits and bobs that I want off that, so we're pulling the selectors off it. They'll get transferred over to another gearbox. Back in the engine bay, so all this engine bay is going to stay the same in terms of modification. We won't make any modifications to it, so we don't need to cut the firewall or bend anything out of shape to make clearance and stuff like that. There's plenty of room in here. We just need to get rid of the rust, prep it all up nice so it doesn't rust in the future, and then eventually we'll obviously be making new engine mounts. There's a better shot of the inner wing, standard transit stuff, so it's just going to get cut out, replaced with new steel, and then we won't have to worry about it again. More work then to clear out the engine bay, get it cleaned down. We want to get it all wire brushed up with the angle grinder and wire brush and everything, and get all the loose rust and paint off. And finish off any patches we need to, and then we can get some buzz weld on the steel work. And there we go, all welded up, looking nice. 2 coats of buzz weld. The red stuff is RE, which is rust encapsulator, and then we've stuck some WAR, which is wheel arch refinement, which is the black stuff. Rear arches here were pretty good condition actually. We did the same sort of thing, wire brushed them all up and painted them. We'll do the whole underside as well once we've done a few of the patches and the sills and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so on to M57 stuff then. This is our M57, our donor engine with the gearbox, subframe, suspension and everything straight out of about a 2005 E60 530D. Obviously we're not going to use the gearbox or the suspension or anything like that, so we're just going to strip this apart, get the engine itself, and you can see there we've got the wiring loom, we've got the ECU and all the bits we're going to need straight out of the car. It's always better to get a donor car, and then that way you've got everything you need for the conversion. You can pick up just an engine, you know, like off eBay and Marketplace and stuff like that, but you always end up having to chase for all the extra random bits, and a lot of breakers will just cut wires and looms and plugs off the stuff that you inevitably will end up needing anyway. So I've always just got a donor car, and then you've got everything you need. So once we've got this stripped down and we've got just the bare engine, we can actually look at then putting the gearbox on the back of it, which uses an adapter plate from Syncro. Pretty straightforward stuff. I'll just quickly breeze through what we've got to work with. So this is the kit from Syncro. This is the full kit and everything you need. And there is a fitting video for this, so you can go through it in detail, but these are all just basically the basic components in it. This is the engine then, without all the gearbox and all the junk and stuff that we don't need. It had got about 150,000 miles on it, which isn't horrendous for these engines, but I imagine that's the original clutch. So we're going to unbolt these bolts, get this all off, get the flywheel off. We've got a brand new flywheel for it and clutch and everything to go on. So we'll just get rid of all this. You can see it's been stood for a little while, so flywheel's not in great condition and it did wobble around a bit. So I'm going to get these massive Torx bits out, get the flywheel off, because I want to change the crank seal as well when we're at that point, which is there behind the flywheel. And I'm going to clean all this up as well and make sure that the crank sensor's good. And I've got my dowels there that came off the gearbox. They were actually stuck in the gearbox, so I've pulled them out, so I've got them. And the dust shield as well, I've kept that. So then just quickly bolting the adapter plate on. It's pretty straightforward stuff, I won't go into too much detail, but you basically bolt the adapter plate onto the back of the engine there like that, and then there's a few bolts that go down in the sump. So I've just got to modify the dust shield here a little bit. You can see that the holes don't line up, the original hole and the hole in the adapter. That's because the adapter kit uses the earlier flywheel, which is a smaller diameter, so you just have to cut that out to make sure the starter motor goes in. So I'm just going to grab that with a die grinder. Sweet, so that's starter motor goes in there, so I'm going to chuck the spigot bearing, new spigot bearing in the end of the crankshaft. And then this is my new flywheel, so this is the earlier flywheel, which is different to the one that came off the engine. And you can see it here actually how they're slightly different spigot bearings in the flywheel on that one, and on my new one it isn't. Okay, so flywheel bolted on, looking good, and I've got a new clutch for it to go on as well. So I'm just going to bolt all that on. Got my clutch alignment tool there to make sure when it comes to sticking the gearbox on, it's not going to be a pain to get it all together. There's nothing worse than struggling with the clutch. Sweet, all bolted on. So I'm just going to check now that this clears and that everything does what it's supposed to do, because I don't want to chuck it in the van and then find out that I've got an issue basically. I've just hooked this up to a battery, literally put it on a battery, and then I'm going to use the screwdriver to turn the engine over and make sure it all works, which it does, so I can carry on. The gearbox side, I've got to do a few bits. The gearbox that we bought, the second-hand gearbox, the end of the input shaft was a little bit damaged, so I just tidied that up to make sure it goes in, the bearing nicely, and I'm going to wire brush up all those splines and then just put a dab of grease on them as well. So next big thing that I've got to do is we've got to cut out the bell housing, because the starter motor's in a different place on the M57 compared to the transit engine. We've got to cut the bell housing out so that it clears, which is straightforward stuff. I've just bolted the adapter to the gearbox first, and then I can mark out where it wants cut in, literally cut it out with the grinder, and then bolt the little starter motor cover over the top of it. And that keeps it all together, which is nice, easy stuff. Cool, so I've got it all bolted up, which is nice, and the clutch arm and everything back in. I put a new clutch arm in it because it was all obviously knackered. So everything in the bell housing now actually is brand new and should last a while. So the plan is to get this running on the pallet there as it is. So I'm going to dig into the wiring and start prepping the wiring to get it running. So this is the wiring loom from MW Machines 4x4. So they do all the wiring looms and stuff for M57 conversions and gearbox conversions and stuff like this. So this is their transit loom, which literally comes in a box, and all you have to do is connect up a few bits and bats to get the engine running on the pallet. So the wiring loom's really, really simple. It comes with everything you need. You just connect up a couple of lives, a couple of earths, and then plug all your stuff back in, like your throttle pedal and all that sort of stuff. And then you can see there it's got an OBD plug as well, and the ECU plugs and stuff, and you just literally just connect it all together as per the instructions. I'm just connecting up a can of diesel and a battery. So I've got a battery there, which we'll turn it all over and start it and everything. I've got a fuel pump from an E46 330D. They're like an inline fuel pump, so it makes it really easy just for mounting stuff. You're not messing around with like an in-tank pump. So I'm just connecting that all up on the pallet now. And then hopefully we can get a run in. You can just about see there by my left foot, I've got my my computer plugged in to the OBD, so I can see what it's doing. I can make sure I've got fuel pressure and all that sort of stuff before it actually fires. And I'm not just like in the dark, because it can be a bit of a pain if you forget to plug something in, or you've got an issue or something. So here's a better shot. You can see I've literally just got a battery pack hooked up and some jump leads to get everything power and an earth. And then the little diesel tank ECU's dangling there, throttle pedal is just sat there, and yeah, it's pretty straightforward, to be honest with you, getting it all running. Pretty much plug and play, and that's a bit of a result. So we know everything works. If it works on the pallet, it worked in the car, it's going to work in the Transit. Moving on then, it's time to get this into the engine bay. It's a big old engine, it's a 6-cylinder engine. Obviously the original was a 4-cylinder engine, so packaging this is quite tough. We're just lifting it in now with the fork truck to try and figure out exactly where we're going to put it, and then we can make up the mounts to suit that sort of position. The first thing we really noticed is on this left hand side, you can see that the firewall comes super close and actually hits this sort of plastic area at the back of the engine, so we'll trim that down out the way, but other than that, everything else has got a ton of clearance. So with that trimmed out the way now, we're going to put in an extra piece of plastic to that shape, and then sort of just hot glue gun it in, so it seals it all back up again. Alright, so you can see there that I've got it in the position I want it. I've got the bottom of the engine, so the sump is flat. It's not tipped over to a funny angle or anything like that. It's sitting in a nice position, the height's good, and it's clearing everything around the bottom of it. I've got loads of room at the top around the bell housing and stuff. The back of the engine's not right in the firewall, so it's in a good spot there, and I think that's where we're going to make the mounts fit. For doing the mounts, all I've done is taken the original cross member off, which sort of sits underneath the sump as a cradle. And then all I'm going to do is remove the original mounts and then bolt my mounts onto the side of it, well actually weld it on, and then using Land Rover 300 TDI rubbers, you can see here we've just fabricated up some mounts and then chuck some gussets in, and everything clears and we're happy with the position, so we can just strengthen them up a little bit more and weld it all into that original cross member. And there you go, with all that done, a bit more buzz weld and a bit more rust repair, we're starting to bolt in the few extra bits like the fuse box. I've got the ECU mounted down there underneath the fuse box to keep all the electrical stuff together. And then just behind you can see the fuel pump here, which is down there by all the fuel lines. I end up moving that up to the top of the engine in the end, just to give it a bit more space and make it easier to get to. A few nice bits on there, so we've got a billet thermostat housing from Syncro, and then also the Syncro steering pulley, which is also billet. Both of those needed replacing. They were both broken because they're normally plastic, so it was nice to get rid of the plastic and just get some nice billet alley in there. A few more bits on, so that's the servo pipe. I've used the original servo pipe. I've used this original air filter box intake. It's the original one out of the E60, and I've just used all the original piping and made it work like that, which is quite neat. Some of the plastics are broken, which is annoying, but it's kind of is what it is. New air filter in. Put all the covers and plastics back on. And then you can also see the exhaust. So we used the 530, the original 530D had got a DPF delete, so that's the DPF delete pipe. And then the rest of the exhaust is a stock transit exhaust. So all we did was put a V-band on both sides and then connect it up, and it worked really well. So with the exhaust, the fuel pump, the electrics all back in and everything plumbed in nicely, that we know it runs on the floor. We can get it running in the Transit now. So as well as the wiring loom and stuff that I had from MW, we had the ECU, and the ECU comes that's deimmobilised and I think tuned also, this one. But they also do a thing where it gets the standard speedo and everything running. So it's all calibrated and clever, and it's literally plug and play. You don't have to mess around with any additional wiring or any additional boxes and stuff like that. You haven't got to mess around. You just plug in the ECU, and then your speedo and your fuel and everything on the dash basically works. Traction control and ABS and everything, it's really clever. Next job then is to get some cooling and finish off the rad, get the rad mounted. Obviously it needs a new intercooler because that one's been stoved in nicely. So packaging this 6-cylinder engine has been tough. It's a big old engine for the Transit engine bay, and we wanted to use as much of the original 530D stuff as possible. We're using the original rad from the 530D and trying to package it in the Transit. You might get away with the original Transit one, but we wanted to go with something a little bit bigger. We didn't want to go for a fancy alley rad, which you could do, absolutely, but we just wanted to do it a little bit on the cheap and keep costs down. So we've just mounted the original rad in there. So just making the top mounts for the rad, all I've done is these are the original 530D rad mounts, and I've just mimicked the kind of the dimple die hole that the Transit has. So rad's mounted, pretty straightforward stuff to be honest with you, and then we've just got to put a fan pack on the front of that, so we've got cooling, and then we can plumb all this up as well, which is not horrendous stuff. On to plumbing now, and I'm just using loads of the pipework and stuff from the 530D and also from the Transit just to make it all work. I've got plenty of pipework, and I only needed the odd 90-degree bend here, silicone bend here and stuff like that. It's just a case of playing with what I got and making it all work. Heater pipes there, all connected up. Just a case of sticking some Jubilee clips on, getting some water in it, make sure it doesn't leak, and then add a bit of coolant as well. So the next thing is swapping over the throttle pedal. So I've actually fitted a Mark 8 throttle pedal because it works with the kit and everything, and it bolts in as a solution. You can't use the Mark 7 throttle pedal, you have to use the Mark 8 one, but they literally bolt in the same place. So now we're at the point that everything's done. We know everything works. We've had it apart about 3 times to make sure everything does what it's supposed to. Dry ran it and got it so that we know that the engine works before wiring everything up fully and plumbing everything fully. But now we're at the point where we can start building it all back up 100% and getting it buttoned up. So again, you can see it's a super tight fit with this 6-cylinder. We had to trim the flitch panel just a little bit to clear some pipe work and a little bit on the bumper to clear the fan pack that we put in, and it is super tight. I think a 4-cylinder BMW engine would go in perfectly. I think you'd have a stack of room and you'd have loads more power and reliability than the 4-cylinder Transit engine, but this 6-cylinder, it was a bit of a pain to package, but it will have a stack of power. few extra bits that we need to do to the van now. We've nailed the M57 conversion bits. Nothing fancy, to be honest with you. We're going to give it a good wash, a good clean, wire brush everything inside and out, get loads of buzz weld on everything, and a lot of welding as well. So you can see we've done a load of patchwork in the wheel well, and we're getting it all covered up with some buzz weld so it doesn't rot away again. With the van running and driving now, we've managed to get it inside the shed, and we can go through everything, get our MOT ready, and driving properly and make sure it does all the stuff it needs to do for an MOT. So driving it out of the workshop properly, finished, kind of, at least, for the first time. All we need to do now is get underneath it, get everything jet washed off, get all the wire brushing done, and get some anti-rust paint under there. So as ever, we're using buzz weld, loads and loads and loads of different buzz welds to get this van looking perfect. A range of different paints, from blacket to their frozen white that matches the paint code of the van originally. And then we've also got their sort of Raptor paint as well, that is in frozen white as well, so it matches the paint code, but it's also actually Raptor. So we stuck 2 brand new wings on the front of this. They come just with like a base coat black, so we needed to paint them to match the rest of the van. So properly finished off now, and you can see everything's the right colour and everything looks as it should do. MOT day, so just waiting to see what happens.
So back from the MOT station, got the ticket, all nice and good. So yeah, I took it back for the second time today. It failed this morning. It needed brake pads, sorry, anti-roll bar bushes on the front, and then a marker light on the front as well. So I rushed home, back to the workshop, and swapped out those bits, and then rushed back same day to get it MOT'd. They put it through, checked all the good stuff, and yeah, so now we've got a ticket on it. And yeah, happy days.
Right, so we're just nipping out, Boxing Day, nipping out in the Transit. We've stuck race car chassis in the back, and we're taking that to be blasted. So we'll take the Transit for a run and see how it goes. So we're in the Transit right now. So Mark 6 Transit, 2.4, 5-speed as standard. Obviously now with the M57 conversion, so that's an M57N, which is a standard 218 brake horsepower, but it's been lightly mapped as well. So she pulls really well, incredibly well actually, 3 litre diesel versus what originally would have been a 2.4. So this is the first big drive, really. We went and we took it for MOT obviously, but this is the first big drive, and we've got a chassis in the back as well, which we're taking for blasting. And yeah, it drives really well. It's incredibly powerful for this sort of vehicle. And yeah, I'm really pleased with it. It's super smooth. And yeah, just like for the cost of it and the amount of work that's gone into it as well, it's just a brilliant conversion over the standard Transit engine, which I think the 2.4 TDCI is like 120 horsepower or something painful like that, and obviously they're not usually reliable and all that jazz, whereas now we're probably closer to 300 horsepower, and you can kind of tell it kind of goes a bit. Transits aren't hugely, depending on what kind you've got, they're not hugely heavy. This one's a medium wheelbase, white top panel van, there's nothing in the back, so it's pretty light. Yeah, it goes well enough. Just showing that cyclist to his boss. And yeah, really happy with the conversion. So we're off.
A little bit about the gearbox.
So the gearbox in this is the standard 5-speed MT75, I think it is, if I remember correctly, which has the same bell housing bolt pattern as the later 6-speed that the adapter's designed for. So bolting it up is exactly the same process, which is really handy. People say that these gearboxes are particularly strong, and I don't know if that's right or not. I don't have a vast amount of experience in them. I think if you were running really high horsepower and you were quite abusive in your driving style, I think you might cause issues. But honestly, in this setup, I think you'd lose traction before you did any damage, because there's just so much power, it just break traction. So guys, thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't seen our other videos and stuff already, go back and watch them as well. And we've also got the Lincoln race car stuff and the Series EV as well. And yeah, just hit the subscribe button, like, share, do all the cool stuff, and we'll see you in the next one.